Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time we've got the pleasure of watching a typical nerd playing World of Tanks. And no, I'm not talking about myself. This gentleman's name literally is Typical Nerd, and he is playing in the Tier 10 Czechoslovakian medium tank, the TVP T50/51. This certainly was one of the most popular vehicles when it comes to the top of the tree shenanigans that Wargaming have been releasing for the last 6 months. If you guys don't play on the European server, basically what that means is that we vote for tanks, and the most popular vehicle across all of the different votes, because they're in different languages, which makes it all get very confusing, then becomes top of the tree, I guess next month. And then what you get from that is all of the vehicles along that tree are discounted, including the Tier 10 tank, which I believe gets a 30% discount, which is up to 2 million credits right off a 6.1 million tank, which is very generous and a great time to pick up the vehicle. And also you get accelerated crew training and things like that. The reason why I mention this is because the TVP, as it is the newest, it's at the end of the newest branch in World of Tanks, right? The Czechoslovakian tanks, although they have been out for an entire year now, was voted as one of the first big top of the tree vehicles. I think probably about, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, possibly 6 months ago now. Boy, how time flies. And when it was top of the tree, I started to play this tank again. I have to admit, when it first came out, I rushed to it. I really enjoyed the Skoda T50, and I enjoyed the TVP as well. But I felt like I never truly nailed the tank. However, then, when it was top of the tree, I came back to it and I started to play it again, and I really started to figure out what are the strengths of the vehicle. And that is waiting for opportunities to be able to empty your magazine very quickly and hopefully safely. Try and find those bursty engagements and to have the patience to be able to wait for them. So the speciality of this tank is that it has a 4-round magazine with its 100mm main armament. Imagine an Object 140 or a T62A, apart from it can fire 4 shots within 4.5 seconds of the first shot, because it only has a 1.5 second delay between the shells. So, as you might remember a few videos ago when I was talking about the Tier 10 French medium tank, the Bat Chatillon, with that fantastic, gigantic magazine of 1950 alpha damage, but it takes so long to be able to fire it. The TVP, on the other hand, has only 1280 damage on average in its magazine, but it just dishes it out so much faster than the Bat Chat, and also its DPM is way better, so it allows you to just pick apart tanks a lot faster than you could do in the only other Tier 10 auto-loading medium tank in the original, the Bat Chat. And so that's what made the TVP so special when it first came out a year ago. And it did take me a while to start to figure out the kind of situations that you try and want to get yourself into. And this, I don't know, that was kind of good, but also not amazing. But actually looking at it, atypical nerd, or typical nerd, I'm sorry, I'm going to be doing that throughout this video, basically encouraged all of those Tier 8 tanks to be able to push through and take out that Centurion 7-1. And he realizes he needs to make some progress on this flank. And so even though he did take 2 shots from the Centurion 7-1, who was using the 20-pounder on that vehicle, if he was using the 105mm, he probably would have only got to fire a single shot at Typical Nerd there. And that, so I guess in the end it was actually a pretty good trade. But this is TVP in a nutshell. And this is also some fantastic marksmanship, because trying to hit a vehicle that's going at pretty much about over 50 kilometers an hour on the move there was rather challenging. But he puts in an entire magazine, 1,336 damage done there with that magazine within 4.5 seconds, pretty much taking out the entirety of that CDC, or I guess leaving him on, would he leave him on 64 hit points there, I believe? I'm not sure if the CDC has 1,400 health or 1,500 health. So that was just perfection for the TVP. But this, however, not perfection for the TVP, right? Well, at least he puts one into the Borsig there. But you cannot afford to waste that many shells in the TVP. You don't have that many to begin with, and each of them, as I mentioned, only hitting for 320, and so you've really got to be careful, just like you do in the Bat Chat, but for different reasons in the TVP. Well, I guess it's exactly the same reason, running out of ammunition and not having enough to kill the entirety of the enemy team. But what I'm trying to say is that the TVP, its key weakness really is that it doesn't have the same penetration of the other tier 10 medium tanks. All of the other tier 10 medium tanks have got about 260, sometimes even 270 millimeters of penetration. This vehicle gets 248 with its APCR rounds. That's 22 millimeters less penetration than the E50M, I believe. And on its heat rounds, it gets only 310 millimeters of penetration, which pretty much all of the other heat standard is about 330. And so quite often what you can find in the TVP is that unless you're engaging softly armored targets or you're hitting weak points on the enemy vehicles, it's not enough to really just auto aim at them and just hold down that mouse button, no matter how tempting it might be. And if you're looking for play like that, then probably one of the other medium tanks will be a lot more forgiving for you. However, then again, in a matchup such as this, where I think half of the enemy team were tier 8, although with a good amount of tier 10s propping up the top of the list, Typical Nerd certainly has to have a good impact in this one. As we can see there, 41%. Usually these are quite challenging to carry at the tier 10 level. So Typical Nerd here, he's having a bit of a lull in his game really. I think he's being a little bit too passive here. But then again, you know, when there's an E100 on the enemy team and there's a Gorilla 15 on the enemy team, those kind of tanks are going to remove pretty much most of your hit points with a single shot, and so you sometimes can't take the risk. So you have to try and take advantage of the mistakes of your opponents, just like this. Good shot there, right through the E100. Will he be able to put 3 into the Gorilla? Let's hope so. There's 1 right through the tracks. Lovely shot. 2, and he also connects his 4th. And I love his reaction here. He's spotted, and a lot of players might think, shall I reverse? Shall I reverse slowly? Maybe try and get behind the 3090. The Gorilla's going to shoot you like that. Typical Nerd instead bolts it forwards towards the Gorilla, uses the agility of the TVP to then use a building to get away from him. And those really are the little kind of things that divide up, say, the people who've maybe got 50% wins to the people like Typical Nerd who have got 58% wins and are having big impacts in their games. So great escape there from the Gorilla, but his job is not done. 4,800 damage in this game and only a single kill to his name. But he has been... he took away pretty much 95% of the hit points of that CDC, for example, but didn't quite manage to get the kill. Now he knows that the Gorilla is significantly weak and that he's hopefully can try and isolate him and assassinate him. Your key play to winning in your autoloaders. And it also looks like he's got a friend. A T-44-100 will be coming with him as well. So he's going to have to play aggressively now. It's a 2 versus 7 situation. Typical Nerd certainly has to be starting to pick apart the enemy tanks quickly to be able to win this one. First one goes in, second one in as well, setting the Gorilla on fire, doing the remaining 9 hit points in damage to the tier 10 German tank destroyer. And I think what he's going to do now is try and change his directions. He's probably just trying to avoid the artillery right now, or maybe he's trying to trick the enemy into thinking that he's going in a different direction, and it looks like he wants to try and continue to the northwest. I guess he's presuming that they're making their way through the center of the map or making their way through the east, and what he wants to try and do right now is escape, but it looks like this IS-3 has closed the distance sufficiently that he's going to have to kill the IS-3 before he escapes, but shouldn't be too tricky. The IS-3 with 323 hit points left, it's pretty much a 50-50 if any of these shells kill him. But of course, Typical Nerd low rolls the shell, leaving him on 1% of his hit points, and that means that the TVP has to spend a little while reloading. But you know what? Your total reload time in this tank, the base reload, is 25 seconds, and with great crew skills and things like Buchti, then you can really reduce that to pretty much about just over 20, maybe 22 seconds. Typical Nerd not using the premium consumable, but he starts his 1 versus 6 by shutting down that IS-3 that he left on just a fraction of his hit points, or his starting hit points at least. So what's he doing now? So he's making it look like he's going one direction, he changes and goes the other. But oh gosh, I think he only just realized that there's a tier 10 Soviet tank destroyer trying to lock him down here, the Object 263. He misses his big old 152mm round that would have removed 3/4 of Typical Nerd's remaining hit points, and now takes his flank. Oh, terrible decision to fire your heat rounds there into the side of the spaced armor, but he connects the following 2 shells, and he doesn't tunnel vision. Beautiful play there, turning round to take out the threat. And when you have the side of a tank destroyer, you know, get a turret, mate, right? He doesn't see the tank destroyer as a threat right now. What he sees as a threat is the T-34, and he doesn't waste the last shell in the 268 and instead finishes off the T-34. And now the CDC probably thinks, oh, the TVP's reloading, right? I can take him out. He comes over, gets a bit too confident, and Typical Nerd shuts down another Tier 8 tank while making the Tier 10 vehicle just look really stupid right now. And this 268, he's played 48,000 games of World of Tanks. He wins 58% of his games. He's got 1,712 WN8, and Typical Nerd is literally running rings around him right now. This Object 268 just looking absolutely confused, panicking completely. And did Typical Nerd manage to take out 2 vehicles there? Or was it 3 vehicles? I'm a bit confused now. But he's going to have to reload again. Can you believe it? Not quite able to take him out with a subsequent 4 shots. Oh, sorry, only 3 shots because of his amount of heat rounds that he had left. Starting to get very awkward with his heat rounds and his APCR rounds now. Putting another 3 into the 268, combining 1,719 damage. And you know what? This 268 is just making so many mistakes right now. He should have done one thing, guys. That 268, all he needed to do was to go to the edge of the map over here. And he pretty much had about a minute or a minute and a half to do that. If he had done that, he would have been able to turn around. Typical Nerd wouldn't have been able to get his side, and it would have been a completely different story. But luckily for us, our hero is still in it, and he's got to try and take out the self-propelled gun on the enemy team. So I'm just trying to think what Typical Nerd actually dealt with there. So he killed a CDC, a Tiger 2. He killed 3 tanks while circling an Object 268. Even I thought, wow, really? He dealt with 3 tanks while circling a tank destroyer? That's absolutely crazy. Fantastic play there by Typical Nerd. But you know what? He didn't really need the autoloader in that kind of situation. I don't think the autoloader was all that useful, although you could argue that he managed to get an entire magazine in before the CDC arrived, so perhaps the TVP was the tank for the job. But I think another Soviet medium tank that would have had pretty much about 20% more DPM, maybe not 20, maybe about 15% more DPM than the TVP, actually probably about 20, maybe even 25 when you take into account that the tank can use a gun rammer, would have been able to get through that situation just as well as the Czechoslovakian medium. So now, Typical Nerd has reduced his remaining 4 high explosive shells, and he's going hunting the FV3805. He's got 2 minutes and 45 seconds to find that Tier 9 British self-propelled gun, who could have run towards the east right now. What he's likely to do is to... Oh, wait a minute. There he is right now. 1 high explosive in, 127 damage. He doesn't track him. Finish him! Finish him! There you go. 1 versus 6, nailed, over 9,000 damage done, and a Radley Walters, and not a heartbreak there against the artillery, even though he had to connect all 4 of his high explosive shells to take out that Tier 9 self-propelled gun. I just absolutely love Typical Nerd's cool-headed approach to that Object 268 situation. Most of us would have shot the Object 268 and allowed the support vehicles, the Tier 8 tanks that were marauding towards us, to finish us off. Not only did he effectively negate or take the Object 268 out of the game by just using his mobility, he did so while removing 20% of the enemy team in the process. What an awesome round. So, Typical Nerd nailed an ace tanker for this replay in his TVP, as well as receiving the medal that everybody wants, the Kolobanov's medal, for standing alone against at least 5 opponents, in this case 6. In addition, Radley Walters medals for his 8 kills, and also a high caliber for the 9,356 damage that he dealt. What an incredible round, way beyond the Call of Duty. Typical Nerd, thank you so much for uploading this on What Replays for the community to enjoy. I thoroughly did, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel out. And simply click through up here or use that more info icon in the top right hand corner of your screen, even if you're on mobile, to see a plethora of awesome TVP replays. And let me know in the comments what features and mechanics of World of Tanks would you most like to have explained to you, perhaps by me in a video format. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.